because pornography is real, like it's actually happening, is
Yeah.
that also, can that have an influence, like a negative influence on how people perceive you're supposed to behave? So like kind of like the violence argument, but just more with
Yeah.
sexual ethics, because it's not simulated versus like a really hot sex scene in a movie where it's not real, but it's really close to real, but it's not real.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there really are kind of like two different levels in which to try to answer that. And the answer might be slightly different based on them. So obviously the one thing people worry about probably more than anything else is just the sort of idea, does it lead to rape or sexual assault or other kinds of
Right.
sexual violence? And I think there we can pretty clearly say that, at least for most like mainstream porn, so if you're showing like a heterosexual couple having sex and it's consenting, or a homosexual couple having sex and it's consenting, that is not just watching people having sex doesn't increase the likelihood of like rape or sexual assault. Or yeah, there's a lot of theories about the sort of idea of commodifying women and this kind of stuff and objectifying. And
Mhm.
on a moral level, maybe we could say there are elements of porn that are objectionable, but in terms of practical impacts, watching the vast majority of pornography does not seem to be associated with increased rates of rape or sexual assault. If anything, somewhat the inverse. If this is correlational data, so I'm not making a causal attribution here, but as societies genuinely liberalize in terms of allowing more pornography, things like rape and sexual assault rates tend to go down in those same societies. Now, that's probably just because of a general liberalizing trend, not anything that porn is doing. But on the other hand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I would, don't mess with the system that's moving in the right direction. If you look at like violent porn, now there's a lot of like, so the way people define violent porn in academia is different also from how like the average like normal person thinks of violent porn. So things like if you're showing a scene where like a man is forcing himself onto a woman, now they might be actors, it may be all simulated, but she appears to be not enjoying it. She's saying no, this kind of stuff. That's actually really rare. It still, obviously it exists. There's a niche market for it. Most men who enjoy porn don't want that. So with that, you find some small correlations between viewing that type of stuff and so if you look at like rapists or sexual assault perpetrators who are convicted, they tend to report at least a history of consuming more of that type of material. Now, it's not really clear though. Does that mean that the porn made them that way, or were they already psychopaths who are interested in violent sex and therefore they're attracted to pornography that portrays that sort of thing? That's what we don't really know very clearly at this point. But in terms of like the 95% of porn that like most people consume, naked images of adults, adults having consenting sex where both people seem to be enjoying it, that's not associated with anything in terms of rape or sexual assault. The other thing, the other level, people sometimes ask, well, what about, does it make some activities more normal seeming?
Yeah.
In other words, did porn result in like people having more oral sex, or people perhaps having more anal sex or things like that, or more, S&M or bondage or, and it's hard to know, did it it probably had the effect of allowing people to talk about it more.
Mm.
So thinking like oral sex, oral sex was not invented in the 1970s, so, but people probably didn't talk a lot about it up until relatively recently. And even in things like anonymous surveys, people might have been, because people do lie in anonymous surveys, people might have been shyer about talking about those things than they are today. I could say like even with my undergraduates, I could tell they're much franker in talking about sex than I would have been as an undergraduate even 30 years ago. So there definitely are these generational changes in how upfront people are in terms of talking about like masturbation, oral sex, and other kinds of activities. Again, I don't know that it's necessarily the case that, again, I don't think most sex acts have been invented by porn, so, but is there kind of an increase in some of these activities resulting from the more widespread availability of porn? I don't think we know for sure. Is the reality of it. I don't think it's the main driving force, but maybe it has a minor impact. A little bit, again, in terms of like normalizing these things, of making it seem like they're not as big a deal as maybe 50, 60 years ago people would have thought of them. There are other myths around porn too, like porn doesn't cause men to have erectile dysfunction. That's another one I hear.
Say it again for the people in the back.
Porn does not cause men to have erectile dysfunction.
Oh
There's
my
no evidence
gosh.
to support that.
I hope that audio clip goes viral. I've had Dr. Nicole Prousey on and Dr. Lay on and just Dr. So on, all of these people that know what they're talking about, and there are plenty of studies that have debunked that myth. And for some reason it's like these Gen Z men that are like swearing oaths of abstinence, like not even like no porn, but they're not masturbating, they're not having sex with men or with women because they have this idea that it's perpetuating ED and lowering their testosterone, which is quite the opposite. It's like if you aren't having
Yeah,
those releases, you are going to continue to have ED because now you're psyching yourself out, and there's this kind of waterfall effect that you're perpetuating onto yourself. But it's not the porn and it's not the women and it's not the
yeah,
dating apps. It's in your own noggin. But for some reason we have like these crusaders out there that are just trying to get
yeah,
rid of porn or are very anti-women, and they're blaming all of those for something that's not going to be beneficial.
all of those kind of like dopamine detox is another similar
Mhm.
thing. All these ideas that you have to sort of withhold pleasure from yourself in order to, I don't know what the outcome is supposed to be somehow healthier down the road is I keep in mind we only get like somebody calculated it's something like 30,000 days. We get like 30,000 days in our lives, and that might be the wrong number, but it's something around there. If you start wasting them by the dozens to deprive yourself of fun. I mean, the reward for all of us is 6 feet of dirt, at the end of it, no matter how virtuously we live. And, I'm not saying we shouldn't live virtuously, but, if we go overboard and actually start depriving ourselves, where we're purposely making ourselves miserable for some number of days of our lives, and in particular, if there's no actual health benefit, from this sort of thing, which there is not from these sorts of activities. I just think you're, sort of like throwing money down the toilet. You're just throwing days of your life down the grave, basically. So no, go ahead, have fun.
No, that's what I'm saying too. I think there's like this weird inherent distrust that people are having in themselves. So it's like,
Mm,
well, if I can't trust myself to enjoy anything, I can't trust myself with pleasure, whether that's like sexually or like the intimacy of someone else, or if it's with food. Like people get crazy with food now too. It's like we have to be able to trust that we can moderate the things that bring us joy, like not to
yeah,
overindulge. And to me, the best way, it's like exercise, like resistance training. Like you have to have some kind of exposure for something to push back at versus just like complete abstinence. Because to me, that's kind of like the lazy way out. It's like it's
yeah,
very easy not to be tempted by something that's not there versus learning to how to like mitigate that, if that makes sense.
yeah. It does, yeah. I think the thing too with like Gen Z, and I kind of hate categorizing people by generations, but within more recent groups of youth, at any rate, is I mean, first off, they are having less sex. They're waiting to have sex later, and they're having sex less frequently, um, which is sort of interesting. It's also interesting to see how like you can't win, because I remember 10 years ago people were complaining that teens were having too much sex. Now they're complaining teens are having too little sex. I mean, you can't win. People are just going to complain. People are just going to complain no matter what. But I think there is a sense, at least in some sub communities of youth. I don't know that like the average kid necessarily is tapped into this, but yeah, there seems to be a vibe, at least in some sub communities, that like sex is dangerous. That they've removed there's a lot of talk about gender and sexual identity, but there's also the sort of vibe that like sex is unfun and dangerous. And again, some of that I think is fair in the sense of like obviously issues around consent. You want to make sure both partners are having a good time and this kind of stuff, and everybody's on board. And so having discussions about that, I think, is very fair. But I think it's kind of the pendulum has swung a lot in the opposite direction of being too licentious, in the sense of now everybody's like on their tippy toes of, on one hand, for women, every sexual encounter might degenerate into an assault. And for men, every sexual encounter might degenerate into a criminal charge, or at least Title IX investigation or something of that sort. So I think, again, that was in response to real problems. I don't want to discredit that, but I think it also has created this sense of around sexuality for some younger people today that it's a much more dangerous activity where, again, even 30 or 40 years ago, we were learning about safe sex, where my generation was learning about safe sex, that people like, yeah, make sure you wear a condom, make sure the girl says yes, so there were a few of those messages that, yeah, I think they were fine messages, but there wasn't the sense of like, if you have sex with someone, you're going to die, or your life will be ruined, or like everybody you're going to have sex with possibly is trying to destroy your life. So yeah, I think there's been this really kind of erosion in trust, as you said, both in ourselves to some extent, but also in our ability to communicate with other people, and and have this sense of being able to have a mutually pleasurable, fun experience with another person, and be able to do that without having a written contract, practically,
Oh
to
my
make
gosh.
sure, and lawyers involved, and
Mhm.
and every step, I'm going to touch your left shoulder now. Is that okay? And all the stuff that, seems to be, we made fun. I remember Saturday Night Live literally making fun of this like 15, 20 years ago. And now it's just kind of how like a lot of the younger people think sex should be. And I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, 'cause
I
all the
understand where it
romance
came
is
from.
out that way and all of the excitement. You have to have a little bit of, like, mystery, like, is this gonna happen? Is he gonna kiss me? Is he gonna, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
not the, "Here's sign on the dotted line, that way everyone's happy." That's crazy to me. Like, obviously, we're all, again, it goes back to, like, not trusting ourselves or, I guess, our partners, but, like, reading social cues. You should be able to
Mm,
very much tell if someone is okay with you doing X, Y, or Z. Like, their body, even if they're not telling you, is gonna say yes or no.
yeah.